stories, where nightmares become to life and shadows appear in the corners.
Emily had always been the one to dig through the forgotten corners of estate sales, her fingers itching for that one overlooked treasure amid the dust and faded memories. At 32, she ran a small online shop selling vintage tech, old cameras, cassette players, anything with a whiff of nostalgia that could fetch a few bucks from collectors. Her apartment in the quiet suburb of Milford was cluttered with boxes of relics, each one a silent witness to lives long past. But this particular find, tucked in a cardboard box at the back of a garage in an old neighborhood, felt different from the start. The box had belonged to the estate of a retired principal from Milford High, a man who'd passed quietly in his sleep last month. Emily had haggled the price down to $10 for the lot, a dusty Super 8 projector, a handful of film reels, and some yellowed manuals. She didn't think much of it until she got home and started sorting through. One reel stood out, labeled in shaky teenage handwriting, AV Club Shenanigans, Spring '87. The plastic canister was scratched, as if it had been handled roughly, and when she held it up to the light, the film inside gleamed with an odd, uneven patina. That evening, she invited her brother Mark over to help test the projector. Mark was 5 years younger, still crashing on friends' couches after his divorce, working odd jobs as a mechanic. He showed up with a six-pack, his usual grin masking the weariness in his eyes from too many late nights. "You and your junk," he teased, cracking open a beer as Emily set up the projector in her living room. The apartment was dim, the curtains drawn against the autumn chill seeping through the windows. The walls, lined with shelves of old gadgets, seemed to lean in closer as the sun dipped low. They threaded the film carefully, the projector's hum filling the room like a distant engine. Emily sat on the worn couch, notepad in hand to jot down details for her listing. Mark sprawled beside her, feet up on the coffee table. The screen, a white sheet tacked to the wall, flickered to life with the familiar whir of celluloid. The footage opened on a group of high school kids in what looked like the school's basement AV room. The camera wobbled as a boy with thick glasses and a mop of curly hair adjusted the lens. "Okay, action," he called, his voice tinny through the projector's speaker. Laughter erupted off-screen. There were 5 of them. The curly-haired boy, who seemed to be the director, a tall girl with braces and a ponytail, holding a boom mic, 2 boys roughhousing in the background, one stocky with a football jersey, the other lanky and awkward, and a quieter girl with short hair, scribbling in a notebook, glancing up shyly. They launched into a sketch, a parody of their history teacher, Mr. Hargrove, droning on about the Civil War. The curly-haired boy donned a fake mustache and paced dramatically, while the others played students nodding off. The humor was juvenile, full of inside jokes that landed flat without context, but there was an infectious energy to it. Emily smiled faintly, imagining these kids sneaking into the AV room after hours, dreaming of Hollywood. Mark chuckled at a bit where the stocky boy pretended to fire a musket made from a broomstick, accidentally knocking over a stack of tapes. As the sketches rolled on, glimpses of their personalities emerged. The director, introduced as Tommy in a title card scrawled with marker, bossed everyone around but with a nervous edge, like he was compensating for something. The tall girl, Lisa, rolled her eyes at his commands but stuck close, her hand brushing his arm once or twice. The stocky one, Brad, was the class clown, always mugging for the camera, but he paused in one shot to adjust his jersey, revealing a bruise on his arm that he quickly covered. The lanky boy, Kevin, laughed along but hung back, his smiles forced, as if he was there more for escape than fun. And the quiet girl, Sarah, rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice was soft, laced with a hint of accent. Maybe from a recent move, Emily guessed. The film jumped to another bit. A mock horror movie trailer where they chased each other through the empty hallways at night, flashlights casting long shadows on the lockers. The school looked much like any 80s institution, faded posters, scuffed linoleum floors, but there was something about the way the camera lingered on the darkened doorways, the echo of their footsteps amplifying in the quiet. Emily shifted on the couch, the room feeling cooler despite the heater's rattle. Half an hour in, the sketches gave way to a blooper reel. Tommy flubbed lines, Lisa tripped over chords, Brad belched mid-take. They were kids being kids, oblivious to the world outside their bubble. Mark yawned, reaching for another beer. "This is cute, Em, but kinda boring. You think it'll sell?" "Just wait," she said, though she wasn't sure why. The film had a pull, like flipping through a stranger's photo album and sensing the stories beneath the surface. Then abruptly, the footage cut. No fade, no title card, just a splice, the image jerking to grainy black and white. The basement AV room vanished, replaced by an empty classroom upstairs. Desks aligned in neat rows under flickering fluorescent lights. The camera panned slowly, as if operated by someone unfamiliar with it. Papers scattered on the floor, a chalkboard smeared with half-erased equations. No sound at first, just the projects were. Emily leaned forward. Did they switch reels?" Mark paused, beer halfway to his lips. "Nah, it's the same film, look at the scratches." The shot lingered on the window, rain streaking the glass outside, though the earlier sketches had shown clear skies. Then, figures appeared in the frame, distorted faces peering through the doorway, features blurred like smudged ink. They weren't the kids, taller, shadowed, dressed in outdated suits that hung loose. One stepped forward, mouth moving in what looked like speech, but the audio crackled with a language that twisted unfamiliar. Guttural syllables, rising and falling in a rhythm that set Emily's teeth on edge. The teacher gestured to an invisible class, writing on the board in looping script that resembled no alphabet she knew. More figures joined, their movements deliberate, eyes fixed ahead. The camera trembled slightly, as if the operator was holding their breath. Emily's skin prickled. This wasn't part of the sketches. It felt intrusive, like stumbling into a private ritual. Mark set his beer down, silent now. The footage held there, the lesson droning on in that alien tongue, the classroom walls seeming to pulse with the hum of the lights. Then, just as suddenly, it cut back to the kids. They were in the AV room again, laughing, but something was off. Tommy turned to the camera, his smile wide, but his eyes darted a fraction too slow, not quite matching the curve of his lips. Lisa leaned in, whispering something, her blink out of sync, like a glitch in the film, or in her. The reel continued, but Emily couldn't shake the chill. As the kids wrapped up their final sketch, waving at the camera, their farewells echoed hollow. The screen went black, but the projector kept running, the tail of the film slapping against the take-up reel. Mark cleared his throat. Weird edit, probably just messing around. But Emily stared at the blank sheet, the apartment's shadows deepening around them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like fingers tapping for entry. She rewound the reel slowly, pausing at that cut. In the grainy frame, one of the distorted faces seemed to stare back, directly at the lens, at her. And then in the silence, she heard it. A faint whisper from the speaker, even though the film had stopped. Words in that same twisted language, murmuring just below the threshold of understanding. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The apartment felt too still, the hum of her fridge unnaturally loud in the dark. She lay on her couch, the projector still set up, its lens staring like an unblinking eye. The reel sat on the coffee table, its scratched canister catching the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. She told herself it was just a strange film, a prank by bored teens. But the memory of those distorted faces and the whispered language lingered, curling into her thoughts like smoke. Mark had left around midnight, brushing off the unease with a forced laugh. "You're overthinking it, Em. It's just some kid screwing around with effects." But his hands had fumbled with his keys as he left, and he'd glanced back at the projector as if it might follow him out the door. Emily hadn't argued. She didn't want to admit how the footage had rooted itself in her mind, those out-of-sync smiles replaying every time she closed her eyes. By morning, the unease hadn't faded. She brewed coffee, the bitter scent grounding her as she sat at her cluttered kitchen table, laptop open. Milford High wasn't hard to find online. A squat brick building from the 60s, still standing but renovated since the 80s. She searched for the AV Club from 1987, hoping to find names or yearbook photos, something to anchor the kids on the reel to reality. The school's website had an archive, but the digitized records from that era were spotty. A few grainy scans of yearbooks mentioned an AV club, but no roster. No photos of Tommy, Lisa, Brad, Kevin, or Sarah. It was as if they'd been erased from the school's history. She hesitated, then typed the names into a broader search. Nothing definitive came up, no social media profiles, no obituaries, no reunion posts. Just a brief article from a local paper, dated June 1987, about a fire in the school's basement that damaged the AV room. No injuries reported, but the cause was undetermined. Emily's stomach tightened. The article didn't mention the club, but the timing felt too close. She called Mark, who answered on the third ring, voice groggy. "It's barely 8 a.m., what's up?" "You free today?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "I want to watch the reel again. Maybe we missed something." He groaned but agreed to come over after his shift at the garage. "You're obsessed," he said, half teasing. She didn't deny it. By late afternoon, the apartment was dim again, the sky outside bruised with clouds. Mark arrived, smelling faintly of motor oil, and plopped onto the couch with a takeout burger. "All right, let's get this over with. What are we looking for?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, threading the reel. "Answers, maybe, why that weird cut was there, who those people were." The projector whirred to life, the same opening sketch flickering onto the sheet. The kids' laughter filled the room again, but Emily watched closely, noting details she'd missed. Tommy's nervous energy seemed more pronounced, his hands twitching when he wasn't directing. Lisa's glances at him held a mix of affection and frustration, like she was waiting for him to notice her. Brad's bravado faltered in quiet moments, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to barge in. Kevin stayed on the edges, his lanky frame hunched, while Sarah's notebook was always in her hands, her pen moving even when she wasn't looking at the page. The sketches played out as before, but Emily's focus sharpened when the footage cut to the classroom. The grainy black and white returned, the empty desks and flickering lights unchanged. The shadowed figures were there again, their distorted faces clearer now that she knew to look. One had a too-wide mouth, another eyes that seemed to sink into their skull. They moved with purpose, writing on the board, gesturing to an invisible audience. The language crackled through the speaker, sharper this time, each syllable like a needle pricking her skin. Mark leaned forward, burger forgotten. "What the hell is that? It's not English, not anything I've heard." Emily paused the film, the frame frozen on the chalkboard's strange script. She grabbed her phone and snapped a photo, zooming in. The symbols were jagged, almost like runes, but they shifted under scrutiny, as if resisting being read. "I looked up the school," she said, voice low. "There was a fire in 87 in the AV room." Mark's brow furrowed. "You think this is connected?" "I don't know, but those kids, they didn't look right at the end. Like they weren't themselves." He didn't laugh this time. They restarted the film, watching as it cut back to the AV room. The kids were there, laughing, but the wrongness was undeniable now. Tommy's head tilted at an odd angle when he spoke. Lisa's smile lingered too long, her eyes unblinking. Brad's movements were jerky, like a puppet with loose strings, and Kevin's laugh sounded forced, almost pained. Sarah was the worst, her pen scratched furiously in her notebook. But when the camera panned to her, her face was blank, eyes fixed on something just beyond the lens. Emily's heart thudded. She rewound to the classroom scene again, pausing on the figures. One of them, the tallest, seemed to turn toward the camera, its blurred face almost resolving into focus. She swore she saw a glint of recognition in its eyes, as if it knew it was being watched. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should stop. This feels wrong." But she couldn't. Not yet. She let the reel play to the end, the kid's final wave frozen on the screen. The projector clicked off, but the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a faint hum, not from the machine, but from somewhere deeper in the apartment, like static, or a voice just out of reach. Emily stood, her legs unsteady, and walked to the projector. She ejected the reel, inspecting it. The film looked normal, but when she held it to the light, the frames from the classroom scene seemed darker, as if the emulsion had thickened. She set it down, her fingers tingling. Let's check the other reels, she said, trying to sound calm. The box from the estate sale held 3 more, unlabeled, their canisters cold to the touch. Mark hesitated, then nodded. They threaded the second reel, the projector humming back to life. The screen flickered, but instead of the kids, it opened on a hallway, Milford High's, unmistakable with its faded green lockers. The camera moved slowly, as if carried by someone walking with deliberate steps. No sound, just the faint creak of floorboards. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar, light spilling from within, pulsing in time with the static hum. Emily's breath caught. The door was the AV rooms, but the light wasn't electric. It was wrong, too bright, too alive. Something moved inside, a shadow that didn't match the kids' silhouettes. The camera stopped, lingering on the threshold, as if afraid to cross. Then from the open door, a voice whispered, a single word in that guttural, unrecognizable language. It wasn't coming from the projector. It was coming from behind them. The whisper hung in the air, sharp and guttural, like a blade slicing through the quiet of Emily's apartment. She froze, her hand still on the projector's power switch, the reel's final frame flickering on the makeshift screen. Mark's eyes widened, his burger wrapper crumpling in his fist as he turned toward the sound. It had come from the corner of the room, near the cluttered shelves where Emily kept her vintage cameras and tape decks. The shadows there seemed thicker now, pooling in a way that defied the dim glow of her floor lamp. "Did you hear that?" Emily's voice was barely above a breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. Mark nodded, his usual bravado gone. "Yeah, what the hell was that?" They sat motionless, waiting, as if moving might invite the voice to speak again. The apartment was silent now, save for the faint hum of the projector cooling down and the distant patter of rain against the windows. Emily's gaze darted to the shelves, half expecting to see one of her old radios crackling to life. Nothing moved, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "We need to check," she said finally, standing despite the tremor in her legs. Mark grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Hold on, that wasn't the film, that was here." "I know." She shook him off, her curiosity outweighing her fear. She'd always been like this, poking at the unknown, even when it scared her. It was why she'd spent her childhood dismantling radios to see how they worked. Why she'd built a business out of salvaging forgotten things. But this felt different, like she'd unearthed something that didn't want to be found. She crossed to the shelves, her sneakers soft on the hardwood. The corner was cramped, stacked with boxes of cassettes and film canisters, a Polaroid camera with a cracked lens, a rotary phone she'd never gotten around to fixing. She scanned the shadows, her breath shallow. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air was colder here, heavy with the musty scent of old plastic and dust. Mark joined her, holding his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, catching glints off metal and glass. "Maybe it was a neighbor," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Sound carries in these old buildings." Emily didn't answer. She reached for the box of reels from the estate sale, her fingers brushing the remaining 2 canisters. They were colder than the first, almost icy, and when she lifted one, a faint vibration ran through her hand. Not mechanical, but alive, like a pulse. She dropped it back into the box. Heart can. "System Magars Part 3, the voice in the room, continued, the canister clattering against the others. "Mark, look at this," she said, her voice tight. She held up the reel, the one labeled AV Club Shenanigans, Spring 87. In the flashlight's beam, the scratches on the canister seemed to form a pattern, almost like the strange script from the classroom scene. She shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. Mark frowned, stepping closer. "What's wrong with it?" "It hummed, like it was alive." She forced a laugh, trying to break the tension, but it came out weak. "I'm losing it, aren't I?" He didn't smile. "After that whisper, I'm not so sure." He set his phone down, the flashlight casting long shadows across the room. "Let's put these away for tonight. We'll figure it out tomorrow." But Emily couldn't let it go. The whisper had been too real, too close. She grabbed the second reel again, ignoring the chill that ran through her fingers, and threaded it back into the projector. One more look, just to be sure. Mark sighed but didn't protest. He sat back on the couch, his posture tense as the projector whirred to life. The hallway scene reappeared, the camera gliding down Milford High's corridor, the green lockers dull under the flickering light. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of floorboards on the film. The door at the end of the hall loomed closer, its pulsing light brighter this time, almost blinding. Emily squinted, trying to make out the shadow moving inside the AV room. It was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, limbs bending at unnatural angles. The footage lingered on the doorway, the camera trembling as if the operator was fighting the urge to run. Then, that whisper again, the single guttural word, clearer now, slicing through the apartment. It wasn't from the projector. It came from the shelves behind them, low and deliberate, like someone standing just out of sight. Emily's heart lurched. She spun around, Mark jumping to his feet beside her. The shelves were still, the shadows unchanged, but the air felt thicker, pressing against her skin. "Mark, you heard it, right?" "Yeah." His voice was hoarse. He grabbed his phone, sweeping the flashlight beam across the corner again. Nothing. But the cold lingered, and Emily's hands shook as she stopped the projector. The screen went dark, but the hum in the room didn't stop. It grew, a low vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She stepped toward the shelves, her breath visible in the chilly air. The box of reels sat there, unassuming, but when she reached for it, the hum spiked, a wordless pressure in her ears. She pulled her hand back, her pulse racing. "It's the reels," she whispered. "Something's in them." Mark's face was pale, his usual skepticism crumbling. We need to get rid of these, burn them maybe." But she shook her head. She'd never walked away from a mystery, not since she was a kid taking apart her father's old radio to find its voice. Not yet. We need to know what happened to those kids. She grabbed her laptop, pulling up the photos she'd taken of the chalkboard script. In the dim light, the symbols seemed to shift again, refusing to hold still. She typed, "Milford High 1987 fire," into the search bar, digging deeper. A forum post from a local history buff mentioned rumors about the AV club. Whispers of kids acting strange after the fire, skipping classes, vanishing from school records. No names, no proof. Just stories. Mark paced, his boots heavy on the floor. "This is nuts, we're freaking ourselves out over nothing." But Emily wasn't listening. She opened the box again, pulling out the third reel. Its canister was unmarked, heavier than the others, and when she held it, the hum in the room pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She didn't thread it yet, just stared at it, her mind flashing to the kids' faces. Tommy's nervous grin, Lisa's lingering glances, Sarah's furious scribbling. What had they seen in that AV room? What had they filmed? She set the reel down, her hands unsteady. "Tomorrow," she said, more to herself than Mark. "We'll watch the rest tomorrow." Mark nodded, but his eyes were on the shelves, where the shadows seemed to sway just beyond the flashlight's reach. They packed the reels back into the box, shoving it under the coffee table out of sight. Mark crashed on the couch, refusing to leave her alone, and Emily didn't argue. She turned on every light in the apartment, the glow pushing back the dark, but not the dread. As she lay in bed, the hum persisted, faint but relentless, like a voice waiting to be heard. She drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of a hallway that stretched endlessly, its lockers slamming shut one by one. In the dream, she reached the AV room door, the light inside blinding. A figure stood there, its face blurred, its mouth moving in that guttural tongue. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, 5 smaller shadows stood. Tommy, Lisa, Brad, Kevin, Sarah. Their eyes wrong, their movements jerking like broken marionettes. She woke with a gasp, the hum louder now, unmistakable. It wasn't in her head. It was coming from under the coffee table, where the reels waited. And then, clear as a bell, a new sound joined it. A soft, deliberate scratch, like a pen writing furiously on paper coming from the living room. The scratching sound clawed through the silence of Emily's apartment, sharp and rhythmic, like a pen dragged across paper in furious bursts. She sat upright in bed, her breath shallow, the hum from the living room pulsing in her ears. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. its red digits casting a faint haze over the room. She strained to listen, hoping it was just the wind or a loose pipe, but the scratching was too deliberate, too close. It was coming from under the coffee table, where the box of reels sat. She slipped out of bed, barefoot, the floor cold against her skin. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of streetlights seeping through the curtains. Mark was still on the couch, his breathing uneven, one arm flung over his face. Emily hesitated, not wanting to wake him, but the scratching grew louder, insistent, like it was calling her. She grabbed her phone, its flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the gloom as she crept into the living room. The coffee table loomed ahead, the box of reels tucked beneath it like a secret no one wanted to keep. The scratching stopped abruptly as she approached, replaced by that low hum, now so deep it vibrated in her chest. She knelt, her hand hovering over the box. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She pulled the box out, the cardboard scraping against the floor, and opened it. The 3 remaining reels gleamed faintly, their canisters unmarked except for the first, still scratched with that eerie script. She picked up the 3rd reel, the heavy one, its weight unnatural in her hand. The hum spiked, a wordless pressure that made her ears ache. She set it down quickly, her fingers tingling, and glanced at the shelves behind her. The shadows there seemed to shift, though nothing moved in the flashlight's beam. She told herself it was just nerves, but the memory of the kids' wrong faces, Tommy's tilted head, Sarah's blank stare, clawed at her mind. "Em?" Mark's voice, groggy but tense, cut through the quiet. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing?" "It's the reels," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're doing something." He swung his legs off the couch, his expression caught between annoyance and unease. "It's 3 in the morning. You're gonna give yourself a heart attack." But he didn't go back to sleep. He joined her by the coffee table, his phone's flashlight joining hers. The beams crossed over the box, making the reel's metal edges glint like eyes. "All right," he said, his voice low. "Let's see what's on this one. Then we're done for tonight, okay?" Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she could stop. The reels felt like a puzzle, each one a piece of something larger, something that wanted to be understood or feared. She threaded the 3rd reel into the projector, her hands steadier now, driven by a need to know. Mark flipped on a lamp, but the light did little to push back the oppressive weight in the room. The projector hummed to life, the screen flickering with static before settling into a new scene. No title card, no kids, just the AV room at Milford High, but different. Dimmer, the walls streaked with shadows that seemed to writhe under the camera's gaze. The equipment was there. Cameras, tripods, a tangle of cables. But it looked abandoned, dust coating the surfaces. The camera moved slowly, panning across the room as if searching for something. Emily leaned forward, her breath catching. The footage felt wrong, like it had been filmed in a place that wasn't quite the school anymore. The air on screen shimmered, like heat rising off pavement, though the windows showed a dark, rainy night. The camera paused on a table where a notebook lay open. It was Sarah's, unmistakable from her tight grip on it in the first reel. The pages were filled with that strange script, scrawled in frantic loops, some lines smudged as if written in a hurry. Emily's skin prickled. She glanced at her apartment door, half expecting to see it rattle. On screen, the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The camera held there, trembling, as a figure stepped into the frame. It was one of the teachers from the classroom scene, its face blurred but sharper now, eyes too large, mouth stretched in a silent scream. It moved toward the camera, its steps uneven, like it was learning to walk. Behind it, more figures emerged from the dark, their shapes distorted, limbs bending wrong. The audio crackled, that guttural language spilling out again. Not from the figures, but from the room itself, as if the walls were speaking. Emily's hands gripped the couch, her nails digging into the fabric. The figures stopped, turning to face the camera, their eyes glinting like wet glass. One raised a hand, pointing directly at the lens, at them. Mark swore under his breath, reaching for the projector's power switch. But before he could touch it, the footage cut. The kids were back, standing in the AV room, but they weren't filming a sketch. They stood in a semicircle, staring at the camera, their faces pale, eyes wide but unfocused. Tommy's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Lisa's hands twitched at her sides, fingers curling unnaturally. Brad swayed slightly, his bruise now visible on his neck, darker than before. Kevin's head was bowed, his shoulders shaking, while Sarah clutched her notebook, her knuckles white. The camera zoomed in on Sarah's face, her eyes locked on something off-screen. She opened her mouth and a single word escaped, not in her voice, but in that guttural tongue, low and resonant. The screen went black. The hum in the apartment stopped, replaced by silence so thick it felt like a weight. Emily's heart pounded, her eyes fixed on the blank screen. Mark was frozen, his hand still hovering over the projector. Then, from the box under the coffee table, the scratching started again. Faster now, urgent, like something was trying to write its way out. Emily's gaze snapped to the box, her breath hitching. The lid, which she'd closed tightly, was ajar, a faint glow seeping from within, pulsing in time with the scratches. She reached for the box, her hand trembling, but Mark grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said, his voice raw. "Em, we need to stop." But before she could respond, the glow flared, and the scratching became a word. A name whispered in that alien tongue, echoing from the box and the shelves and the walls all at once. It was her name. The whisper of her name, Emily, slithered through the apartment. Not just from the box, but from every corner, as if the walls themselves had learned to speak. It was low, guttural, layered with that alien language, and it lingered in the air like damp rot. Emily's hand froze inches from the glowing box, her skin prickling as the temperature in the room plummeted. Mark's grip on her wrist tightened, his face drained of color, eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse in time with the fading whisper. "Em, we're leaving now." His voice cracked, barely holding together. He stood, pulling her up, but her legs felt rooted, her gaze locked on the box. The glow inside flickered, not like a bulb, but like something alive, breathing. "We can't just leave it," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The reels had burrowed into her, their mystery a hook she couldn't shake. She'd always chased answers, even as a kid, tearing apart her father's electronics to uncover their secrets, ignoring the shocks that left her fingers numb. This was bigger, darker, and it had called her by name. Mark yanked her arm harder, his mechanic's hands rough from years of wrenching bolts. "This isn't a game, Em. That thing knows you." But she pulled free, kneeling by the coffee table. The scratching had stopped, but the glow pulsed stronger, casting faint patterns on the ceiling, jagged lines, like the script on the chalkboard. She reached for the box, her breath visible in the cold air, and lifted the lid. The third reel sat atop the others, its canister glinting, the scratches on its surface now unmistakably forming that strange alphabet. The glow came from within the reel itself, seeping through the film's edges. "Don't touch it," Mark hissed. But Emily's fingers brushed the canister. It was warm now, not cold, and the hum returned, vibrating through her bones. She pulled back, heart pounding, and grabbed her phone instead, snapping a photo of the glowing reel. The screen froze for a split second, the image distorted, the symbols shifting like they were crawling. "We need to see the last reel," she said, standing, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever this is, it's in there. Those kids, they saw something. We need to know what." Mark shook his head, pacing to the window and peering out, as if expecting to see those distorted figures from the footage standing in the rain-soaked street. "You're crazy. You heard that thing say your name. This isn't just some old film." But Emily was already threading the final reel, her hands moving on instinct. The projector whirred, its hum blending with the one in the room, creating a dissonant chord that set her teeth on edge. Mark stayed by the window, his silhouette tense, but he didn't stop her. He knew her too well. Once she latched onto something, she didn't let go. The screen flickered, and the footage opened on the school's basement hallway. The same one from the second reel, but now the walls were streaked with something dark, smoke, maybe, or soot from the 1987 fire. The camera moved unsteadily, as if carried by someone running. No sound, just the faint creak of the floorboards, amplified by the projector's speaker. The lockers loomed, their shadows twisting into shapes that didn't match their outlines. The camera reached the AV room door, still ajar, but the light inside was dimmer now, a sickly yellow that pulsed erratically. The lens lingered, trembling, then pushed forward, crossing the threshold. Inside, the room was a wreck. Equipment toppled, cables tangled, chairs overturned. The notebook was still on the table, open, its pages now smeared with that dark substance, the script barely legible. Emily's breath caught as the camera panned to the corner. The 5 kids stood there. Tommy, Lisa, Brad, Kevin, Sarah, huddled together, their faces pale, eyes wide but unseeing, like they were staring through the walls. They weren't moving, not even blinking, but their hands twitched, fingers curling in unnatural rhythms. Sarah's notebook dangled from her grip, pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze, though the air was still. The camera zoomed in, shaky, focusing on Tommy's face. His mouth opened and that guttural language spilled out, not his voice, but the same one that had whispered Emily's name. The words were slow, deliberate, a chant that seemed to pull the shadows closer. Lisa's head jerked, her eyes sliding to the camera, her pupils too large, swallowing the light. Brad's bruise had spread, a dark web across his neck, pulsing faintly. Kevin's shoulders shook, a silent sob, while Sarah's pen scratched across the notebook without touching the page. The footage cut abruptly, replaced by static, but the chant continued, louder now, echoing in the apartment. Emily's hands clenched, her nails biting into her palms. The projector's hum grew erratic, the bulb flickering as if struggling to stay lit. Mark spun from the window, his face ashen. "Turn it off, Em, now." But before she could move, the static cleared and the screen showed a new scene. The AV room, but empty, the equipment gone, the walls bare. The camera panned slowly, revealing a single figure in the center. A tall, shadowed shape, its face blurred but familiar. One of the teachers from the classroom. It stood motionless, then raised its head, its eyes glinting like wet stones. It spoke a single word, Emily's name, clear and sharp, not through the projector but from the air around them. The screen went black, but the projector kept running, the reel flapping uselessly. The hum in the room swelled, joined by that scratching sound again, now coming from the shelves behind them. Emily turned, her flashlight beam catching the glint of her old cameras, their lenses reflecting the room in warped fragments. One lens seemed to hold a shadow that wasn't there, a shape that moved when she blinked. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "We're done, we're getting out." But Emily's eyes were on the box where the glow had returned, brighter now, spilling onto the floor. The scratching grew frantic, and as she stared, the lid of the box shifted, pushed open by something inside. A faint handprint appeared on the coffee table, smudged in that same dark substance from the footage, and with it came a new sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps approaching from the hallway outside her apartment door. The tapping at the door echoed through Emily's apartment, slow and deliberate, each knock a pulse that matched the frantic beat of her heart. The handprint on the coffee table gleamed wetly in the dim light, the dark substance pooling like ink, its edges creeping outward as if alive. The glow from the box of reels pulsed in time with the tapping, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls, mimicking the script from the footage. Emily stood frozen, her phone's flashlight trembling in her grip, the beam catching the glint of her shelves' cluttered relics. Mark's hand was still on her arm, his fingers digging in, his breath ragged. "And we gotta go," he whispered, his voice barely holding together. He tugged her toward the door, but her feet wouldn't move. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, not like a visitor, but like something testing the barrier between worlds. The air was thick, cold, heavy with the scent of dust and something sharper, metallic like blood. She tore her eyes from the door and looked at the box. The lid was fully open now, though neither of them had touched it. The reels inside glowed brighter, their light spilling onto the floor, forming patterns that twisted into that alien script. The scratching sound returned, not from the box but from the shelves, where her old cameras and radios seemed to hum in response, their lenses and dials glinting as if watching. "We can't leave," Emily said, her voice low but firm. She didn't know why, but running felt like surrender, like letting whatever was in those reels win. She'd spent her life chasing the stories behind forgotten things. Radios, cameras, lives, and this was no different. Except it was. This wasn't a puzzle to solve. It was a wound, raw and open, and it knew her name. Mark's face twisted, fear warring with frustration. "You're not thinking straight. That thing said your name, Em. It's not just a movie." But she pulled free, kneeling by the coffee table. The handprint was spreading, the dark substance seeping into the wood, leaving faint traces of that script. She grabbed the first reel, the one labeled AV Club Shenanigans, Spring '87, and held it up. The scratches on the canister were deeper now, almost carved, and warm to the touch. The hum in the room spiked, a pressure in her skull, and the tapping at the door stopped, replaced by a low creak, like the hinges were straining. She stood, clutching the reel, and moved to the projector. "One last time," she said, more to herself than Mark. "We need to see how it ends." "Are you insane?" Mark grabbed her shoulder, but his voice faltered as the creak at the door grew louder, the wood groaning as if something heavy pressed against it. He let go, stepping back, his eyes darting between the door and the projector. "Fine, but if this gets worse, we're out." Emily threaded the reel, her hands shaking but steady enough to work the machine. The projector whirred, its bulb flickering as the screen lit up. The footage opened where the first reel had ended, the kids waving, their smiles wrong, eyes out of sync. But this time, the scene didn't cut to black. It lingered, the camera pulling back to reveal the AV room's walls, now streaked with that dark substance. The script scrawled across them in frantic loops. The kids stood in a semicircle, motionless, their faces blank, their hands twitching like they were caught in a loop. The camera panned to the door, the same one now creaking in Emily's apartment. On screen, it swung open, revealing the hallway, but it wasn't Milford High's anymore. The walls were wrong, too tall, too smooth, stretching into a darkness that seemed to breathe. The teachers stood there, their distorted faces clearer now, mouths stretched too wide, eyes like voids. They moved toward the kids, their steps jerky but purposeful, and the camera trembled as if the operator was fighting to hold it. Tommy's voice broke through, not his own, but that guttural chant joined by Lisa, Brad, Kevin, and Sarah, their mouths moving in unison. The words weren't just sound, they were weight, pressing against Emily's chest, making it hard to breathe. The figures reached the kids, their hands extending, fingers too long, curling around their shoulders. The kids didn't flinch, didn't run. They just stood, their eyes fixed on the camera, on Emily. The footage cut to the classroom from the second reel, but now the desks were occupied, not by the kids, but by shadows, their forms flickering like bad film. The tall teacher stood at the chalkboard, writing that script, its hand moving faster, the chalk snapping in half. The camera zoomed in, and Emily saw it, a name written among the symbols. Her name. The projector sputtered, the bulb flaring, and the screen went white, but the chant continued, louder, coming from the apartment now, from the shelves, the walls, the door. Emily's vision blurred, the hum in her head a roar. She stumbled back, the reel clattering to the floor, and Mark grabbed her, pulling her toward the door. But the door was open now, just a crack, the hallway beyond swallowed by darkness. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic breathing, like something waiting just out of sight. Mark froze, his hand on the knob, his face pale. "And we can't go out there." She turned, her flashlight sweeping the room. The box was glowing brighter, the reels inside vibrating, the script on their canisters pulsing like a heartbeat. The handprint on the table had spread, covering the surface, and now it wasn't just a hand. It was a figure, etched in that dark substance, its face blurred but unmistakable. One of the teachers. The chant grew louder, her name woven into it, and the shelves rattled, cameras and radios shifting as if trying to speak. Emily's eyes locked on the Polaroid camera, its cracked lens glinting. She grabbed it, instinct overriding fear, and snapped a photo of the room. The flash was blinding, and for a split second she saw them. 5 figures in the corner, Tommy, Lisa, Brad, Kevin, Sarah. Their faces wrong, their eyes fixed on her. The Polaroid spat out the photo and Emily grabbed it, her hands shaking. The image developed slowly, revealing the room, the table, the box. But in the corner, where the kids had been, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to stare back, and at the edge of the frame a single word was scratched into the emulsion: her name. The door creaked wider, and a shadow moved in the hallway, tall and wrong, its breathing louder now, closer. Emily clutched the photo, her heart pounding as the chant swelled, filling the apartment, and the reels began to spin on their own, their light flaring into a blinding blaze. Thank you for listening. Hope you didn't get too scared. If you want to listen more stories, check out my channel. Please leave a like and subscribe. It means the whole world to me.